The night was dark and full of whispers as we set up our campsite on the outskirts of Lost Mountain, a place known for its eerie legends and unsettling mysteries. The air was crisp, and a sense of unease lingered beneath the surface. My friends and I, Jake, Emily, and Mike, were excited for our night camping adventure, but none of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we gathered around the crackling campfire, our laughter and stories seemed to echo through the dense forest. The towering trees cast long, dancing shadows, and the rustling of leaves in the wind only added to the unsettling atmosphere. Emily suggested we share ghost stories to add to the thrill of the night, and we eagerly agreed. After recounting tales of haunted houses and restless spirits, Mike decided to tell a story about the legend of Lost Mountain itself. He spoke of a vengeful spirit said to possess those who dared to camp at the mountain after dark. The possession would begin with a sense of dread and paranoia, followed by whispers in the wind that gradually grew louder and more insistent, until the victim was no longer themselves. We laughed off Mike's story as just another spooky legend meant to add excitement to our camping trip. But as the night wore on, and the fire's warm glow began to dim, an inexplicable unease crept over us. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on me, and every rustle of leaves seemed like a sinister whisper. As we settled into our tents for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. The wind seemed to carry voices that danced on the edge of my hearing, and my heart raced as I strained to listen. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me and tried to fall asleep. However, sleep was elusive that night. A restless energy pulsed through the air, and I could hear Emily tossing and turning in her tent nearby. At one point I thought I heard her muttering to herself, but I couldn't make out the words. Concerned, I unzipped my tent and peered out into the darkness. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie patterns on the ground. I called out to Emily, but she didn't respond. Instead, her muttering grew louder and more frantic. I unzipped her tent to find her sitting upright, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was whispering incoherently, her voice a haunting blend of fear and desperation. I reached out to touch her, and she turned to me with a vacant stare. "Emily, are you okay?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers in the wind seemed to intensify as Emily's gaze fixed on me. Her voice, now distant and otherworldly, sent shivers down my spine as she spoke. "They're here, Jake. They're watching from the shadows, waiting to take us." Terror gripped me as I stumbled back from her tent. Mike's ghost story felt all too real in that moment. I woke him up, and we both rushed back to Emily's tent. But as we arrived, she was gone. The tent was empty, and there was no sign of her. Panic surged through us as we frantically searched the surrounding area, calling out her name into the echoing darkness. Then, from somewhere in the woods, we heard her voice again, singing softly. It was a haunting melody that seemed to draw us deeper into the forest. Mike and I exchanged fearful glances but knew we had to find her. The wind carried her voice, guiding us through the twisted trees and thorny underbrush. As we followed her voice, the moonlight grew dimmer, and an oppressive darkness closed in around us. The whispering shadows seemed to wrap themselves around our minds, and I could feel the fear and paranoia gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. It was as if the very essence of Lost Mountain was trying to claim us. Finally, we stumbled upon Emily standing at the edge of a clearing. Her eyes were vacant, and her voice was no longer her own. It was a chorus of chilling whispers that spoke in a language I couldn't understand. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to hold its breath as Emily slowly turned towards us. "Join us, Jake," the whispers hissed through her voice. "Become one with the shadows. Embrace the darkness." Mike and I stood frozen in terror as Emily stepped closer, her gaze locking onto us. It was as if the very soul had been drained from her eyes, leaving behind only an abyss of darkness. We were paralyzed by the suffocating aura of the mountain, unable to escape its grasp. But then, a faint glimmer of warmth broke through the darkness. It was the first light of dawn, casting its gentle glow over the clearing. The whispers wavered, and Emily's vacant stare faltered. Mike and I seized the opportunity and, with a surge of adrenaline, grabbed Emily and fled from the clearing. The moment we stepped out of the mountain's grasp, The whispers faded into the wind, and Emily's vacant expression slowly regained life. She had no memory of what had happened, only a lingering feeling of dread and darkness that we packed up our campsite in a hurry and left Lost Mountain behind, vowing never to return. The drive back was filled with an uneasy silence as we processed the horrifying events of the night. The line between legend and reality had blurred in the most terrifying way possible. Even now, safe and far away from the mountain, I can't help but wonder if the shadows and whispers still linger within us, waiting for the right moment to return. The night at Lost Mountain had forever changed us, a chilling reminder that some legends are born from very real and sinister truths.
I'm Sarah, and I never thought a camping trip to the picturesque mountains of the USA with my boyfriend Adam could turn into a chilling nightmare. We chose to venture into the renowned Woodland Peaks for a taste of wilderness, tranquility, and adventure. Little did we know, the woods held something far more sinister. The sun was setting as we arrived at Woodland Peaks, the sky painted with hues of orange and purple. Our excitement was palpable as we set up our campsite near a serene, babbling brook. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine filled our lungs. We laughed, pitched our tent, and prepared for a night of stargazing. As darkness descended, the woods took on an eerie aura. The towering trees cast long, menacing shadows, and the once cheerful stream seemed to whisper secrets in a hushed tone. Adam and I huddled around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Everything felt perfect, until a strange unease began to worm its way into my heart. Adam must have noticed my tension because he squeezed my hand reassuringly. "It's just the spooky ambience of the mountains, Sarah. We're safe together." I tried to shake off the unease and laughed, but the forest seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something. We retired to our tent, and as we settled in, I could feel the weight of the darkness outside pressing against the fabric. Sleep eluded me that night. The wind carried whispers that sounded almost like my name, and every rustle of leaves felt like footsteps approaching. I nudged Adam awake, and he mumbled, "It's just the woods, babe. Go back to sleep." As I lay there, eyes wide open, I heard something. A distant, mournful cry that sent shivers down my spine. It was like a lament, a sound that should never be heard in the heart of a forest. I woke Adam again, and he sighed, "I'll go check it out, okay?" Adam left the tent, and I waited anxiously, my heart racing. Minutes felt like hours, and just when I was about to go after him, he stumbled back into the tent, his face ashen. His eyes were vacant, distant, and his voice came out as a hollow whisper, "They're calling me, Sarah." The voices in the shadows. My blood ran cold as I watched him. His movements were unnatural, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. He stepped closer, and his voice grew louder, echoing with a malevolent tone, "Join us, Sarah. Embrace the darkness. We've been waiting." Terror paralyzed me as he reached out a hand, his fingers brushing my cheek with an icy touch. I recoiled, my mind racing, and suddenly, he lunged forward, his grip tight on my wrist. I screamed, struggling to break free, but his strength was unnatural, inhuman. "Adam, please." I sobbed, tears streaming down my face. His eyes were no longer his own, a sinister glint in their depths. The woods seemed to close in around us, suffocating and filled with the same mournful cries. Just as I thought I couldn't escape his grip, a blinding light pierced the darkness. It was the moon, casting its glow through the tent's entrance. Adam's grip faltered, and I scrambled away from him. The moment the light touched him, he convulsed, his body contorting in agony that I watched in horror as he let out an unearthly scream, his voice a chorus of tormented cries. And then, in a rush of darkness, he collapsed to the ground, his body still. The following hours were a blur. I stumbled out of the tent, my mind reeling. The woods were silent now, the sinister presence gone. As dawn broke, the police arrived, and I recounted the events of the night. They searched the area but found no trace of Adam's body. Weeks later, I returned to Woodland Peaks, desperate for answers. The forest was peaceful, as if nothing had happened. I ventured deeper, and there, in a small clearing, I found a circle of stones, ancient and weathered. In the center lay a single black feather, a symbol of the darkness that had consumed Adam. The truth hit me like a punch in the gut. The forest had taken him, consumed his very essence. And as I stood there, I realized the chilling twist. His whispers were still with me, echoing in the wind. The darkness had left its mark, a reminder of that fateful night in the woods. Woodland Peaks would forever be tainted by the horror we'd experienced. The whispers in the shadows would never truly leave me, a haunting reminder that some mysteries are best left undisturbed.
I'm Sherlock, and what started as a simple family trip turned into a chilling ordeal that I'll never forget. My family and I were excited to hit the road for a vacation, but as we found ourselves stranded with a broken-down car, things took a horrifying turn we never saw coming. It was a sunny day when we set off on our journey. My wife, Emma, and our 2 kids, Lily and Max, were all smiles as we drove through scenic landscapes. But as the day wore on, the car's engine began to sputter and cough. Before we knew it, the car stalled completely in the middle of nowhere. Frustration and unease filled the air as we realized we were stranded on a deserted road. With no other option, we decided to make the best of it and set up camp beside the road. We gathered our supplies and pitched a tent, hoping for a quick fix the next day. As night fell, a strange sense of isolation settled over us. The forest seemed to close in around our makeshift campsite, and the darkness felt thicker than it should have been. We huddled around a small campfire, trying to lighten the mood with jokes and stories, but an underlying tension lingered. Lily and Max were tired, so we settled them in the tent and tried to make the most of our situation around us. I dismissed it as an animal or the wind, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. As the night wore on, the wailing grew louder, closer. It was as if it was drawing nearer to us, a ghostly lament that chilled me to the bone. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but the look of terror on Emma's face told me she heard it too. Then, out of the darkness, something emerged. A figure, hazy and indistinct, with glowing eyes that fixed on us. It stood just beyond the reach of the firelight, its features obscured by shadows. Its presence sent a surge of primal fear through my veins. "Emma, do you see that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She nodded, her fingers digging into my arm. The figure seemed to sway in the darkness, its wailing growing louder and more mournful. Its form shifted and contorted, and I realized with a sickening jolt that it wasn't entirely human. Its limbs were twisted, its face a grotesque mask of pain and suffering. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible over its wailing. The figure's eyes seemed to burn brighter, and its mouth opened in a silent scream. Its spectral form glided towards us, its movements unnatural and unsettling. Emma and I stumbled back, our hearts pounding in our chests. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it directly at the figure. In the stark beam of light, its features became horrifyingly clear. Its skin was pale and mottled, its eyes empty sockets that seemed to bore into my soul. It reached out towards us, its fingers like bony claws. Without thinking, we turned and ran towards the tent, grabbing Lily and Max in a panic. The wailing pursued us, echoing through the trees as we stumbled through the darkness. We reached the car and piled in, not caring about the broken engine. I slammed the door shut and turned to look back at the figure, but there was nothing there. The woods were empty, the wailing had ceased. It was as if the nightmare had vanished as quickly as it appeared. We drove away in a terrified silence, not daring to look back. We reached a gas station and called for help, and eventually, a tow truck arrived to rescue us. The driver found nothing wrong with the car, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had been lurking in those woods. Weeks later, I still can't explain what we saw that night. A ghost, a hallucination, I don't know. But the memory of those glowing eyes and that haunting wail continues to haunt my dreams. The road trip that was meant to bring us joy instead brought us face to face with a horror we'll never forget. And the chilling twist? Every now and then, late at night, I can still hear that mournful wailing echoing in the shadows.